A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, Book the Second, The Golden Thread, Chapter 24, Drawn to the Loadstone Rock. In such risings of fire and risings of sea, the firm earth shaken by the rushes of an angry ocean, which had now no ebb but was always on the flow, higher and higher to the terror and wonder of the beholders on the shore, 3 years of tempest were consumed. 3 more birthdays of little Lucy had been woven by the golden thread into the peaceful tissue of the life of her home. Many a night and many a day had its inmates listened to the echoes in the corner, with hearts that failed them when they heard the thronging feet, for the footsteps had become in their minds as the footsteps of a people tumultuous under a red flag, and with their country declared in danger, changed into wild beasts by terrible enchantment long persisted in. Monsignor, as a class, had disassociated himself from the phenomenon of his not being appreciated, of his being so little wanted in France as to incur considerable danger of receiving his dismissal from it. And this life altogether, like the fabled rustic who raised the devil with infinite pains, and was so terrified at the sight of him that he could ask the enemy no question, but immediately fled, so Monsignor, after boldly reading the Lord's Prayer backwards for a great number of years, and performing many other potent spells for compelling the evil one, no sooner beheld him in his terrors than he took to his noble heels. The shining bull's eye of the court was gone, as it would have been the mark of a hurricane of national bullets. It had never been a good eye to see with, had long had the mote in it of Lucifer's pride. Sardanapala's luxury, and a mole's blindness, but it had dropped out and was gone. The court, from the exclusive inner circle to its utmost rotten ring of intrigue, corruption, and dissimulation, was all gone together. Royalty was gone, had been besieged in its palace and suspended when the last tidings came over. The August of the year 1792 was come, and Monsignor was by this time scattered far and wide. It was natural. The headquarters and great gathering place of Monsignor in London, as was natural the headquarters and great gathering place of Monsignor in London, was Tellson's Bank. Spirits are supposed to haunt the place where their bodies are most resorted, and Monsignor, without a guinea, haunted the spot where his guinea used to be. Moreover, it was the spot to which such French intelligence was where such French intelligence as was most to be relied upon came quickest. Again, Tellson's was a munificent house, and extended great liberality to old customers who had fallen from their high estate. Again, those nobles who had seen the coming storm in time, and anticipating plunder or confiscation, had made provident remittances to Tellson's, were always to be heard of there by their needy brethren, to which it must be added that every newcomer from France reported himself and his tidings at Tellson's almost as a matter of course. For such variety of reasons, Tellson's was, at that time, as to French intelligence, a kind of high exchange, and this was so well known to the public, and the inquiries made there were in consequence so numerous, that Tellson sometimes wrote the latest news out in a line or so and posted it in the bank windows for all who ran through Temple Bar to read. On a steaming, misty afternoon, Mr. Lorry sat at his desk, and Charles Darnay stood leaning on it, talking with him in a low voice. The penitential den, once set apart for interviews with the House, was now the news exchange, and was filled to overflowing. It was within half an hour or so of the time of closing. "But although you are the youngest man that ever lived," said Charles Darnay, rather hesitating, "I must still suggest to you—" "I understand that I am too old?" said Mr. Lorry. "Unsettled weather, a long journey, uncertain means of travelling, a disorganized country, a city that may not even be safe for you." "My dear Charles," said Mr. Lorry, with cheerful confidence, "you touch some of the reasons for my going, but not for my staying away. It is safe enough for me. Nobody will care to interfere with an old fellow of hard upon fourscore, when there are so many people there much better worth interfering with. As to its being a disorganized city, if it were not a disorganized city, there would be no occasion to send somebody from our house here to our house there, who knows the city and the business of old, and it is in Tellson's confidence. As to the uncertain travelling, the long journey, and the winter weather, if I were not prepared to submit myself to a few inconveniences for the sake of Tellson's, after all these years, who ought to be?" "I wish I were going myself," said Charles Darnay, somewhat restlessly, and like one thinking aloud. "Indeed, you are a pretty fellow, and advise," exclaimed Mr. Lorry. "You wish you were going yourself, and you are a Frenchman born. You are a wise counsellor." "My dear Mr. Lorry, it is because I am a Frenchman born that the thought, which I did not mean to utter here, however, has passed through my mind often. One cannot help thinking, having had some sympathy for the miserable people, and having abandoned something to them," he spoke here in his former thoughtful manner, "that one might be listened to, and might have the power to persuade to some restraint. Only last night, after you had left us, when I was talking to Lucy—" "When were you talking to Lucy?" "When you were talking to Lucy," Mr. Lorry repeated. "Yes, I wonder you are not ashamed to mention the name of Lucy, wishing you were going to France at this time of day." "However, I am not going," said Charles Darnay with a smile. "It is more to the purpose that you say you are." "And I am, in plain reality. The truth, my dear Charles." Mr. Lorry glanced at the distant house, and lowered his voice. "You can have no conception of the difficulty with which our business is transacted, and of the peril in which our books and papers over yonder are involved. The Lord above knows what the compromising consequences would be to numbers of people if some of our documents were seized or destroyed, and they might be at any time, you know. For who can say that Paris is not set afire today or sacked tomorrow? Now, a judicious selection from these with the least possible delay, and the burying of them, or otherwise getting of them out of harm's way, is within the power, within loss of precious time, of scarcely anyone but myself. If anyone, and I shall hang back when Tellson's knows this and says this, Tellson's whose bread I have eaten these 60 years, because I am a little stiff about the joints, why, I am a boy, sir, to half a dozen old codgers here. How I admire the gallantry of your youthful spirit, Mr. Lorry." "Tut, nonsense, sir. And my dear Charles," said Mr. Lorry, glancing at the house again, "you are to remember that getting things out of Paris at this present time, no matter what things, is next to an impossibility. Papers and precious matters were this very day brought to us here. I speak in strict confidence. It is not businesslike to whisper it even to you, by the strangest bearers you can imagine, every one of whom had his head hanging on to a single come and go as easily I skipped a line. By the strangest bearers you can imagine, every one of whom had his head hanging on by a single hair as he passed the barriers. At another time, our parcels would come and go as easily as in business-like old England. But now, everything is stopped." "And do you really go tonight?" I really go tonight, for the case has become too pressing to admit of delay. And do you take no one with you? All sorts of people have been proposed to me, but I will leave nothing to say to any. But I will have nothing to say to any of them. I intend to take Jerry. Jerry has been my bodyguard on Sunday nights for a long time past, and I am used to him. Nobody will suspect Jerry of being anything but as an English bulldog, or of having any design in his head, but to fly at anybody who touches his master. I must say that I heartily admire your gallantry and your usefulness. I must say again, nonsense, nonsense. When I have executed this little commission, I shall perhaps accept Tellson's proposal to retire and live at my ease. Time enough, then, to think about growing old? This dialogue had taken place at Mr. Lorry's usual desk, with Monsignor swarming within a yard or two of it, boastful of what he would do to avenge himself to the rascal people before long. It was too much the way of Monsignor under his reverses as a refugee, and it was much too much the way of native British orthodoxy to talk of this terrible revolution as if it were the only harvest ever known under skies that had not been sown, as if nothing had ever been done or omitted to be done that had led to it, as if observers of the wretched millions of France, or of the misused and perverted resources that should have made them prosperous, had not seen an inevitability coming years before, and had not, in plain words, recorded what they saw. Such vaporing, combined with the extravagant plots of Monsignor for the restoration of a state of things that had utterly exhausted itself and worn out heaven and earth as well as itself, was hard to be endured within some remonstrance by any sane man who knew the truth. And it was such a vaporing all about the ears, like a troublesome confusion of blood in his own head, added to a latent uneasiness in his mind, which had already made Charles Darnay restless, and which still kept him so. And we will pause there.